we interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show!
They were loud, bright, and full of promise. Then they vanished without a trace, like childhood dreams left behind in a dusty VHS case. What really happened to the cartoons the 80s tried to make you forget? There are strange shows. And then there is Turbo Teen. Imagine waking up drenched in sweat only to realize your body is morphing into a red sports car. That is exactly what happened to Brett, a regular teenage boy who, after a freak accident involving a government lab and a crash into a molecular beam, now transforms into a car every time he gets hot. Literally. Heat turns him into a vehicle. Cold turns him back. This was the central premise of Turbo Teen, and even in the anything-goes culture of 1980s cartoons, this was a stretch too far. Airing in 1984, Turbo Teen wanted to ride the wave of car obsession made popular by shows like Knight Rider. The art was slick, the animation was decent, but no amount of style could make up for the fact that the show's premise made absolutely no sense, not even to kids. Why did Brett need to become a car to fight crime? Why were the transformations so unsettlingly detailed, complete with stretching limbs and warping metal? The audience, already saturated with cooler, more coherent heroes, could not suspend their disbelief for this long. Even the villains were forgettable. There was Dark Rider, the mysterious nemesis who drove a black monster truck and growled a lot, but never truly did anything threatening. And while the show tried hard to blend action, science fiction, and teen drama, it ended up being none of those. The episodes felt like a half-remembered fever dream. Even the voice acting came off awkward and mismatched, like everyone in the recording booth knew they were on a sinking ship. Turbo Teen only lasted for a handful of episodes before getting the quiet axe. The strange part? It somehow stuck in the memory of every child who saw it, perhaps because of how bizarre it truly was. It is the kind of cartoon you bring up at a dinner party, wondering aloud if anyone else remembers that one show where the kid turned into a car. Most people do, but nobody remembers it fondly. The early 1980s had one very specific obsession, the Rubik's Cube. It was colorful, maddening, and sold by the millions. So naturally, someone at a studio said, "What if we turned that cube into a living character with magic powers?" Rubik, the Amazing Cube, was born in 1983, and it was every bit as strange as it sounds. This was not just a cartoon. This was a symptom of how desperate the television industry had become to turn every popular toy into a personality. Rubik was not a person. He was a floating, talking Rubik's Cube with a high-pitched voice and magical abilities. He could fly, teleport, shapeshift, and, because this was the 1980s, teach kids life lessons along the way. He belonged to a group of 3 siblings, Hispanic kids named Carlos, Lisa, and Ronaldo, which was honestly one of the only refreshing and progressive things about the show. But no amount of diversity could rescue this from being a toy commercial with very loose logic. The show's biggest sin was that it was boring. Rubik would get scrambled, and the kids had to solve him. Then Rubik would do something magical to help them solve a minor neighborhood problem or escape from cartoonishly evil villains. Repeat. Week after week. There was no real sense of tension or continuity, and even kids could tell they were watching something hollow. It was not fun. It was not exciting. It was just strange. People remember it not because it was good, but because they cannot believe it actually happened. Gary Coleman was one of the biggest stars on television in the early 1980s. He was charming, funny, and instantly recognizable thanks to his role on Different Strokes. So it made perfect sense that someone would try to bottle that magic in cartoon form. But what came out of that idea was The Gary Coleman Show, and it is one of the strangest attempts at animated stardom ever made. In this show, Gary plays a character named Andy LeBeau, a kid who dies and becomes an apprentice angel sent back to Earth to earn his wings by helping other children. Yes, that is the plot. A cartoon about a dead child helping the living. Somehow, this was meant to be heartwarming and funny. Instead, it was jarring and deeply confusing. The show tried to be moralistic in tone, but it never quite figured out what age group it was speaking to. The animation was stiff, the dialogue was clunky, and the moral lessons felt forced, like after-school specials squeezed into a format that could not support their weight. Each episode would end with Gary's character learning a lesson, usually in the most obvious and uninteresting way possible. And unlike his live-action counterpart, animated Gary lacked any of the comedic timing or charisma that made the real Gary Coleman a household name. Even more unsettling was how the show tried to balance comedy with this overarching concept of death and redemption. Kids watching cartoons on Saturday mornings were not prepared to wrestle with angel bureaucracy or celestial missions. They wanted slapstick, action, and talking animals, not metaphysical career development in the afterlife. The Gary Coleman Show ran for just one season in 1982. It quietly disappeared from the airwaves, never making it into the ranks of reruns or nostalgic retrospectives. It remains one of the most bizarre footnotes in cartoon history, proof that star power alone cannot save a show that never should have existed in the first place. There is Forgotten, and then there is Rude Dog and the Dweebs. This show came out at the tail end of the 1980s and looked like someone dumped a bunch of neon paint onto a pile of rejected t-shirt designs. Rude Dog was meant to be cool. He had shades, he had a pink convertible, he talked in surfer slang. He was the embodiment of late 80s attitude. But even at the time, kids could smell the desperation. The premise was thin. Rude Dog ran an auto shop and hung out with a gang of other misfit dogs called the Dweebs. Each dweeb had a single personality trait and not much else. There was a nervous one, a tough one, a dumb one. You get the idea. They would go on adventures that usually involved outsmarting a grumpy dog catcher or fixing a car. None of it was funny. None of it made sense. The animation was loud and jittery, with jagged lines and garish colors that made it hard to even look at for more than 5 minutes. And Rude Dog himself was irritating. He was supposed to be rebellious and slick, but he just came across as smug and obnoxious. Parents hated the name. Critics hated the show. Even kids were unimpressed. It felt like a failed marketing ploy disguised as a television show. There was also something deeply cynical about the whole thing. Rude Dog was originally created for a clothing brand. This was not a show that started with a story or characters. It started with a logo, and you could feel it in every second of the cartoon. It had no heart, no soul, just marketing fumes. Rude Dog and the Dweebs was canceled quickly and buried even quicker. It is rarely mentioned even in the most in-depth retrospectives of 1980s animation. A relic of corporate desperation dressed up in neon fur. Zorro is a name that once meant something. It conjured images of sword fights, masked justice, and Spanish colonial drama. But in 1981, the New Adventures of Zorro tried to bring that legacy to a new generation, and ended up slicing its own identity to ribbons. What should have been a swashbuckling revival turned into a forgettable shadow of the hero's former glory. The show wanted to be educational at times, injecting light history into the plot, but it always felt awkward and misplaced. Kids were not tuning in for Spanish colonial geography. They wanted heroes and high-stakes action. What they got was a watered-down vigilante with none of the spark that made the original stories iconic. The show only lasted for one season and left barely a footprint. It is rarely rerun, rarely referenced, and mostly remembered as a failed attempt to modernize a character that deserved better. In trying to make Zorro palatable for children, the show removed everything that made him legendary. It is proof that not every icon can be reborn through animation, and some legacies are better left untouched. If there was ever a cartoon that perfectly captured how clueless the rich looked to regular kids, it was Beverly Hills Teens. Airing in 1987, this show thought it was being glamorous and fun. But to the kids watching at home with broken remote controls and boxed macaroni dinners, it felt more like a taunt. The series followed a group of high society teenagers living in ridiculous luxury, complete with private limousines, mansion estates, yacht parties, and closets full of designer outfits. It was supposed to be aspirational. Instead, it felt tone-deaf. Each character was a walking stereotype. There was the spoiled princess, the handsome jock, the nerdy outcast, and of course, the evil rich girl. But unlike the charm of something like Gem and the Holograms or The Heart of Saved by the Bell, this show never gave its characters any depth. The drama felt fake, the dialogue was unbearable, and every single episode was dripping with privilege that made no sense to the average viewer. It was like watching a teen soap opera written by someone who had never met a teenager or a human being. And it flopped. Hard. Kids could not relate to it. Parents found it obnoxious, and critics panned it as out of touch with its own audience. The show barely lasted a season, and even nostalgia cannot polish this one. It is not remembered because it was good. It is remembered because it felt like a parody of itself, even when it was trying to be sincere. For a show about the rich and fabulous, Beverly Hills teens had absolutely no staying power. There was a time when Teddy Ruxpin was more than just a toy. He was a phenomenon. The animatronic storytelling bear took bedrooms by storm in the mid-1980s, with his soft voice and moving eyes hypnotizing kids into thinking they had a new best friend. So when a cartoon was announced, expectations were sky high. The Adventures of Teddy Ruxpin was supposed to be the next big thing, but it never lived up to the hype. The show followed Teddy as he journeyed through the magical world of Grundo with his pals, Grubby the Caterpillar and Newton Gimmick, the absent-minded inventor. Together, they searched for ancient artifacts, uncovered secrets, and helped strangers in need. It sounds like a solid fantasy setup, but here is the problem. It was slow. Painfully slow. The storytelling was so gentle and drawn out that it felt more like a bedtime story stretched across 20 minutes than a cartoon meant to compete with Transformers or Thundercats. There was also a disconnect between the toy and the show. The magic of the original Teddy Ruxpin was interactive. He read stories, he moved his mouth, he felt alive. The cartoon, on the other hand, was passive. You watched it, and it never gave you anything back. Without that interactivity, the whole thing felt hollow. The series had a decent run, 65 episodes, but it faded fast. By the late 1980s, Teddy Ruxpin the toy had also lost his place in toy aisles. The cartoon followed, vanishing into the growing pile of forgotten 1980s media. Teddy Ruxpin may have started as a friend you could trust, but his cartoon never quite earned the same warmth. Kissy Fur sounds like a joke. It sounds like the name someone makes up when trying to parody a children's show. But in 1986, it was real. And not only that, it aired on a major network. This was the story of a young bear cub named Kissy Fur and his father Gus, who moved to the swamp to start a new life after escaping the circus. That premise alone should tell you how weirdly specific this show was trying to be. Kissy Fur himself was just okay. He was a typical good kid protagonist, kind, helpful, and a little too perfect. There were no real stakes. The villains were two bumbling alligators who failed at everything, and the adventures were usually about community problems, like fixing a dam or helping a friend build a house. Sweet? Maybe. Memorable? Not in the slightest. Kissy Fur ran for 2 seasons but was quickly forgotten in reruns. It had none of the punch that made other 1980s cartoons so rewatchable. Today, it exists mostly as a footnote, a relic of the brief moment when networks thought kids wanted tender swamp dramas instead of high-octane toy tie-ins. Sometimes a cartoon's heart is in the right place, but its paws are stuck in the mud. Take one animal, mash it with another, give it a pun for a name. That was the entire idea behind The Wuzzles, a short-lived Disney cartoon from 1985 that never quite found its audience. These brightly colored hybrid creatures lived on the Isle of Wuz and had names like Bumblelion, Ellaroo, and Butterbear. They were cute, they were whimsical, and they vanished almost as quickly as they arrived. At first glance, The Wuzzles looked like it had everything going for it. It was a Disney production, it had clever creature designs, and it launched right alongside another animal-focused cartoon Adventures of the Gummy Bears. But while Gummy Bears had lore and world building, the Wuzzles had puns. Lots and lots of puns. That was the humor. And for a lot of viewers, it got old fast. The animation was solid for the time, and the color palette was extremely vibrant. Maybe too vibrant. The visuals were so saturated that they almost hurt to look at. And while the merchandise had a decent run, the show itself never gained traction. It only produced 13 episodes. Just 13. And then it was done. Part of the problem was timing. The Wuzzles were aimed at a younger audience, but they aired alongside shows with more action, humor, or emotional depth. They were too soft to be memorable, too safe to be exciting. Kids moved on, so did Disney. Today, the Wuzzles are remembered mostly as odd-looking plush toys from the back of the closet. They were cute, yes, but sometimes cute just is not enough. Dinosaurs from space. That is the pitch. And to be fair, it is a great pitch, especially if you are 8 years old and obsessed with both Jurassic Park and Star Wars. In 1987, Dinosaurs aimed to be the next big cartoon phenomenon. It had talking dinosaurs, high-tech gadgets, a full-on galactic war, and even human sidekicks called Secret Scouts. But despite all that, the show fizzled out faster than a comet crash. The basic story was this. Good dinosaurs from the planet Reptilon come to Earth to stop their evil counterparts, the Tyrannos. Yes, that is what they were called, the Tyrannos. The heroes had names like Allo, Stego, and Tricero. The villains had names like Genghis Rex and Terrible Dactyl. It was delightfully on the nose, but the execution never matched the creativity of the concept. The show was stuffed with lore, but it delivered it in long, boring exposition dumps. The battles were clunky and poorly choreographed. The animation felt rushed, and the character designs, while imaginative, were inconsistent from scene to scene. One minute you had a sleek space dino shooting lasers. The next minute it looked like someone scribbled a doodle on a napkin and sent it to air. Even with a strong toy line, Dinosaurs could not keep up with heavier hitters like Transformers, He-Man, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It ran for only one season, and by the time it left the airwaves, most kids had already moved on to cooler heroes with better writing. Dinosaurs had all the ingredients to become a legend, but somewhere between concept and screen, it turned into a fossil. If you walked into a toy store in 1985, you might have seen a blazing wall of die-cast vehicles with spinning saw blades, robotic arms, and wild alien colors. Jace and the Wheeled Warriors was supposed to be the cartoon that brought those toys to life. But instead of fast-paced fun, kids got a swirling, confusing mess of lore-heavy fantasy wrapped in a plot too complicated for even some adults to track. It was as if someone mashed together Dune, Voltron, and a car commercial, then lost the instructions on how to tell the story. The basic premise was promising. A young warrior named Jace sets out on a mission to reunite with his missing father and stop a horde of mutant plant creatures called the Monster Minds. That alone could have worked, but instead of focusing on clear, direct storytelling, the series leaned heavily into mythology, weird side characters, and a backstory that kept stacking higher with every episode. You could miss one installment and be completely lost the next time you tuned in. Kids wanted action, clarity, and fun. Instead, they got intergalactic botany and existential monologues. It was a show that wanted to be taken seriously, but forgot who its audience actually was. Despite a great theme song and massive merchandising push, Jace and the Wheeled Warriors never reached escape velocity. It aired for a single season and was quietly shelved. You can still find fans online who insist it was brilliant. Maybe it was, but for most viewers, it was simply too much, too soon, and too strange to remember. In the shadow of Thundercats and Silverhawks came Tiger Sharks, a cartoon that tried to dive deep but barely made a splash. Created by Rankin Bass, the same minds behind some of the most iconic 1980s action cartoons, Tiger Sharks was supposed to be their next big franchise. But unlike its feline and metallic siblings, this aquatic spin-off never found the current it needed to survive. It sank fast, and today, most people do not even know it existed. The setup was familiar. A group of heroes, half human, half sea creature, defended the underwater world of Water-O from evil alien pirates. They had a base, a mission, transformation sequences, and of course, a whole arsenal of water-themed powers and gadgets. But something about it just never came together. The characters were flat, their personalities barely distinguishable. You had Mako the leader, Dolph the dolphin guy, Octavia with her 8 arms, names that sound cooler than the characters ever were in action. The biggest problem, though, was timing. By 1987, kids had already chosen their champions. Thundercats roared, He-Man ruled, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were just around the corner. Tiger Sharks was too little, too late. It did not help that it was buried inside the comic strip, a syndicated package show that split attention between multiple series, making it harder to follow or care about any of them. It never got a toy line, never got reruns, and was never given a proper home video release. Tiger Sharks is the definition of forgotten, an ambitious but ultimately aimless swim through shallow waters. In a decade dominated by lasers, robots, and Ninja Turtles, the Get Along Gang felt like it wandered in from a much quieter, simpler world. This was a show built around the power of friendship, literally. The gang was a group of anthropomorphic animals who lived in a caboose clubhouse and spent their time solving petty squabbles, helping neighbors, and learning life lessons. There were no villains, no battles, no superpowers, just hugs, compromise, and a lot of feelings. At the center of it all was Montgomery Moose, the well-meaning but bumbling leader, surrounded by his pals Dottie Dog, Woolma Lamb, and Zipper Cat. Every character represented a type, the shy one, the vain one, the brainy one, and each episode explored how they handled common social situations. Maybe someone was left out, maybe someone told a fib, maybe someone just needed help painting a fence. It was low stakes, and that was kind of the point. But the problem was, it came at a time when kids' entertainment was rapidly evolving. Shows like G.I. Joe, Voltron, and Transformers offered explosive battles and serialized storytelling. The Get Along Gang, in comparison, felt like it was moving in slow motion. It did not offer any thrill. It did not spark imagination. And while the message of kindness was noble, the execution was often dull. Despite an early push from greeting card companies and a modest toy line, the Get Along Gang only managed to eke out a handful of episodes. It was a relic of a softer vision of childhood, one that simply could not compete with the louder, faster, flashier worlds filling every screen. The gang meant well, but television is not always kind to good intentions. John Candy was one of the most beloved comedians of the 1980s. So when Camp Candy debuted in 1989, featuring a cartoon version of Candy running a summer camp full of misfit kids, it seemed like a sure hit. He voiced himself, and his larger-than-life warmth translated beautifully to animation. But even with his star power, Camp Candy could not find its place in the crowded world of Saturday morning cartoons. The idea was simple. John Candy was a goofy but lovable camp counselor guiding kids through the chaos of camp life. Hikes gone wrong, pranks gone wild, and the occasional heartwarming lesson. But the show leaned too hard on its simplicity. The humor was soft, the stakes were low, and the animation was just passable. It lacked the energy and punch needed to grab kids who were used to watching monsters, heroes, and space battles on other channels. To make matters worse, the show arrived during a shifting moment in children's entertainment. The early 1990s were right around the corner, and shows like Animaniacs, Batman, the animated series, and Rugrats were about to change the game. Camp Candy felt like it belonged to an earlier era. It was sweet but slow, funny but forgettable. The show ran for 3 seasons but never gained a strong following. Today, it lives in the background of nostalgia, more of a fond memory of John Candy than of the cartoon itself. Sometimes even the warmest hearts cannot keep a show from cooling off. Popples were weird. Cute, yes. Colorful, definitely. But weird all the same. These fuzzy, tail-flipping creatures were part of a toy craze in the mid-1980s, a hybrid between a plush animal and a foldable ball. Kids loved the toys. So naturally, someone decided they needed their own cartoon. The result was The Popples in 1986. a high-energy, high-pitched blur of a show that bounced off the walls and quickly out of public memory. The plot, such as it was, involved the Popples helping two kids, Bonnie and Billy, while trying to stay hidden from the rest of the world. Each episode followed the same formula. The Popples wanted to help with something, caused chaos instead, and had to clean up the mess before the adults found out. Think Slapstick meets Saturday Morning Sugar Rush. The show barely made it past one full season. Despite the toys holding on for a bit longer, the cartoon faded almost instantly. It was rebooted decades later, but even then, it never caught on in a meaningful way. The Popples were cute enough to cuddle, but never strong enough to stick. Some cartoons are born from imagination. Others are born from greeting cards. Shirt Tales, which premiered in 1982, was firmly in the second camp. Based on a popular line of Hallmark greeting cards, the show featured a group of cute animal friends who wore shirts that displayed their thoughts in glowing text. It was a quirky concept, but not much more than that. The characters, Tig Tiger, Pammy Panda, Rick Raccoon, and a few others, lived in a treehouse and took on mild-mannered adventures, usually involving helping a friend or outsmarting a generic villain. Their personalities were thin, the humor was flat, and the glowing shirt gimmick, while mildly entertaining at first, could only carry the story so far. The animation was serviceable, but unremarkable. It lacked the bold style or distinctive charm of its competitors, and the show often felt more like a Saturday morning time filler than a true contender. There was no world building, no long arcs, no real stakes, just fluffy stories tied together with shallow sentiment. Shirt Tales managed 2 seasons before it quietly disappeared. Like many cartoons of the era, Shirt Tales came and went like a commercial jingle, catchy for a moment, but quickly lost in the noise. With a name like Pole Position, you would expect high-speed races, thrilling chases, and pulse-pounding stunts. What you got instead was a lukewarm Mystery of the Week series featuring a pair of siblings and their talking cars. Loosely based on the popular arcade racing game, Pole Position aired in 1984 and instantly proved that brand recognition alone is not enough. The plot centered around Tess and Dan, 2 members of a secret government crime-fighting team. They drove high-tech cars named Wheels and Roadie, who had onboard AI and could perform tricks straight out of a spy movie. It sounds fun, but in execution it was oddly restrained. Episodes were filled with exposition, awkward pacing, and light tension. Action sequences felt stiff, dialogue was wooden, and the tone flipped between serious and silly without ever landing comfortably. Unlike shows like Mask or Knight Rider, Pole Position never nailed down its identity. Was it a tech fantasy? A family drama? A racing show? It tried to be all 3 and failed at each. It ran for just 1 season, producing only 13 episodes before vanishing from the road entirely. The video game was a hit. The cartoon, barely a blip. Pole Position is a perfect example of missed opportunity, a high-octane name wasted on a show that never got out of first gear. Silverhawks had everything going for it, almost. Created by the same team behind Thundercats, the 1986 cartoon featured a group of metal-winged heroes fighting evil in deep space. The designs were sleek, the toy line was strong, the theme song was unforgettable, and yet something about the show never took flight the way it should have. The premise was solid. A group of cybernetic space cops, part human and part machine, battle the villain Monstar and his gang in the galaxy of Limbo. They soared through space, shot lasers from their wings, and delivered justice across the stars. But while the concept was imaginative, the execution was uneven. Episodes felt repetitive. Characters lacked personality, and aside from the visuals, there was little to hold on to. Despite an aggressive marketing push and a loyal niche fan base, Silverhawks only ran for 1 season. Toys collected dust, reruns dried up. And while Thundercats remained a pop culture staple, its metallic sibling faded into obscurity. They looked cool, they sounded cool, but in the crowded cartoon galaxy of the 1980s, cool was not enough. Silverhawks never soared, they just hovered for a moment. What do you get when you combine medieval knights with futuristic holograms? Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light. a 1987 cartoon that dared to mash up magic and technology in a single dazzling package. The idea was bold. The visuals were striking. The toy line shimmered with holographic brilliance. But the show? It barely made a dent. Set on the planet Prismos, where technology had mysteriously failed and magic re-emerged, the series followed two rival factions of knights. Good versus evil, as always, each granted animal totems and magical staffs. The visuals were loaded with glowing effects and detailed armor, giving the impression of something grand. But behind the flash was a story too dense and too serious for most young viewers. Episodes were dialogue-heavy and packed with exposition. Battles felt distant and emotionally flat. And while the lore was rich, it came at the expense of momentum. Kids were not looking for complex world-building. They wanted action, laughs, or relatable characters. Visionaries offered none in meaningful supply. Even the toys, despite their holographic novelty, did not sustain interest. The show only lasted for 13 episodes before being canceled. It had the look of a hit, but not the soul of one. Visionaries was ambitious, but ultimately alienating, a concept ahead of its time, delivered too soon and to the wrong crowd. The light may have been magical, but it faded fast. This was not just a flop. It was a marathon of flops stretched over a single disastrous season. The Trouble with Tracy aired in Canada, but made its way to the United States through syndication, where its legacy of failure quickly spread. The show was an attempt to create a daily sitcom, airing 5 days a week, modeled after successful American family comedies. But the pressure to churn out 130 episodes in a single year proved too much for its creators. Sets were reused until they literally fell apart. Scripts were recycled from old radio plays. Actors were given one take. Sometimes, if something went wrong, it simply stayed in the episode. Scenes with boom mics in frame, flubbed lines, dead silence where laughter should have been. It became less of a show and more of an endurance test, and yet people watched. Some because it was the only thing on, others out of sheer fascination. The show had a strange, chaotic charm, like watching live theater while the stage crumbles underfoot. Critics called it the worst sitcom ever made. Viewers did not necessarily disagree. But something about Tracy, her over-the-top optimism, the show's desperate energy, made it linger in memory. It is studied now not for its success, but for its sheer audacity. A reminder that television is sometimes powered more by deadlines than inspiration. And when that happens, you get a show that feels like it is held together with tape and panic. The Trouble with Tracy was a mess, but it was a glorious, relentless mess, the kind you cannot look away from. If you grew up in the 1990s, this show was like the cool older cousin who always knew what was up, but still made time to help you with your homework. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper followed Mark Cooper, a former professional basketball player turned high school teacher who used humor, honesty, and a whole lot of heart to guide kids through school and life. Played by Mark Curry, he was the kind of teacher everyone wished they had. He cracked jokes but never dodged the real stuff. He called it like he saw it. He cared. But the show was not just about Cooper. It was about a house filled with friends, family, and the messy love that holds them together. Vanessa, his confident and hilarious roommate, brought sass and style. Geneva and young Nicole added warmth and relatability. They all lived together, stumbled together, and picked each other up when the world got rough. It felt like family, even if it was not traditional. What made Mr. Cooper stand out was how seamlessly it blended life lessons with laughs. It dealt with serious issues, peer pressure, racism, disappointment, without ever getting preachy. And it never forgot to have fun along the way. For 5 solid years, it was a staple of the family night lineup. Then it was gone, quietly shuffled off the schedule, with little fanfare and less reason. The reruns dried up. The impact did not. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper was one of the last sitcoms that felt like it cared about kids and adults at the same time. And for many of us, that kind of care was rare. Allegra's window was quiet magic. The kind that spoke softly, moved slowly, and told you that curiosity was not something to be fixed, it was something to follow. You probably do not remember the songs or the exact lessons, but you remember the feeling, the colors, the puppets, that gentle breeze of a show that made it okay to wonder out loud. Allegra was a young puppet girl, learning about the world around her from her window, her neighborhood, and the little day-to-day moments that make up childhood. It was not about saving the world. It was not about zapping aliens or being loud to be funny. Allegra's window was about learning to be kind, to listen, to care. It was built for the softer kids, the thinkers, the ones who stared out the window too long and asked questions no one had time to answer. This show made time. It was filled with music, yes, but not the over-caffeinated kind. The music here had rhythm, patience, heart. Each character was designed to be nurturing, a mirror for kids trying to figure out big feelings in a small world. And the world? It was beautiful, rounded edges, pastel colors, faces that smiled without a punchline. Allegra's window did something you do not see much anymore. It respected a child's inner life. It gave you a place to rest, reflect, and grow. Not in a race, not in a rush, just in your own little rhythm. Somewhere deep inside, you miss that. Not the puppets, maybe, not the theme song, but the peace, the permission. The idea that growing up did not have to be loud or fast to be meaningful. The idea was magic. A group of travelers, scientists, teens, mystics, find themselves trapped in a mysterious dimension where time and reality break down. They search for a way home, journeying through a series of strange lands, each with its own rules, cultures, and dangers. That was The Fantastic Journey. A mix of science fiction and fantasy, it was a show that promised discovery, imagination, and adventure. But what it delivered was something far more chaotic. Despite an ambitious premise, the show was never given the time or budget it needed to build its world. Sets looked recycled. The effects were underwhelming. The writing swerved between philosophical and campy, often within the same episode. One week they were battling telepathic overlords. The next week they were navigating a land of forgotten civilizations. It felt like 3 different shows fighting for control. Characters were introduced and dropped. Storylines never paid off. Even the lead actor was changed mid-season. NBC had hoped for a ratings hit, but the show struggled to build a consistent audience. Viewers were intrigued but also confused. What was the journey, really? Where were they going? And why did it feel like the writers were just as lost as the characters? After only 10 episodes, The Fantastic Journey was canceled. But in those few hours, it captured something unique. A wild, unpolished attempt to blend science fiction with mythology and metaphysics. It did not succeed, but it did not completely fail either. For some, it still lingers as a vivid memory of what television used to try before it learned to play things safe. A weird, winding path through television's stranger corners. It was one of those shows that should have faded into parody, but somehow carved out a place in America's living rooms, and never really left. The Beverly Hillbillies followed the Clampett family, simple folks from the Ozarks who struck oil and suddenly found themselves living in a Beverly Hills mansion they could not understand, surrounded by wealth they never asked for. The comedy was obvious, their backward ways clashing with the glittering absurdity of high society. But beneath the laughs was something quieter, something almost tragic. This was a story about people who never quite fit in, no matter how big their bank account got. Jed Clampett, the soft-spoken patriarch, always seemed like he was looking for something he had lost, even as the world laughed around him. Granny's wild wisdom and Ellie Mae's innocence made them caricatures on the surface, but real to anyone who knew what it meant to be treated like a joke just for being different. And America watched, week after week, because it reminded us that not every outsider is looking to blend in. But then, just like that, the Clampetts were gone. One day they were gracing prime time, the next they were a punchline, buried beneath newer shows with shinier backdrops and faster jokes. The laugh track stopped, and no one asked why. Today, the Beverly Hillbillies exists mostly in rerun limbo, a relic with a twang, treated like a fossil of a simpler time. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching Granny try to make moonshine in a millionaire's kitchen, then you remember what television used to be. Odd, imperfect, human. And sometimes, that was exactly what made it so rich. The secret world of Alex Mack felt like someone handed you a diary filled with electric secrets and said, "This is what growing up really feels like." Not just the awkward parts or the funny bits, but the transformation, the fear, the pressure to hide who you are just to survive middle school. Alex Mack was just a normal girl until one accident gave her superpowers: telekinesis, shape-shifting, even turning into a silver puddle. But here's the thing. It was never really about the powers. It was about what you do when you are different and scared and trying to stay invisible. It was about lying to your best friend because the truth might ruin everything. About hiding from the people who say they want to help but only want to control you. About looking in the mirror and not knowing what version of yourself is going to show up that day. It captured all the weirdness of adolescence and wrapped it in science fiction that felt just close enough to possible. The show had a grit to it. Not dark, but raw. It did not sugarcoat the fear of getting caught or the anxiety of not being normal. And yet, it still found space for humor, for friendship, for those little wins that make being a teenager bearable. Alex was smart, brave, messy, and real. Her world was complicated. Her choices were heavy. And you watched because somewhere deep down, you wondered what secrets might be hiding in your own world too. What if something in you was strange, or powerful, or both? The secret world of Alex Mack was not a fantasy. It was a mirror. And sometimes it showed us more than we were ready to see. It was bold. Too bold, maybe. Hot L Baltimore came from Norman Lear, the mastermind behind groundbreaking hits like All in the Family and Maude. Based on a stage play by Lanford Wilson, the show was set in a rundown hotel filled with outcasts, dreamers, and people society had quietly ignored. Prostitutes, illegal immigrants, transients, they all called the hotel home. And that was exactly the problem. In a time when primetime television was still finding its nerve, Hot IL Baltimore pushed the line so far forward that many stations refused to air it at all. The show tackled sex, poverty, racism, and identity, topics that were still taboo even by Lear's fearless standards. There was no laugh track to soften the edges, just conversations that felt uncomfortably real. Critics were split. Some praised it as raw and unflinching. Others found it too confrontational. And while Lear had managed to make controversy work in the past, this time the balance tipped. Viewers were unsure whether they were supposed to laugh, cry, or change the channel. Ratings were modest. Affiliate pushback was fierce. After just 13 episodes, ABC pulled the plug. Hot L Baltimore was gone. But it left a mark. It showed just how hard television had to fight to reflect real life, and how easy it was for something honest to be labeled too dangerous. Today, the show is rarely mentioned, but it remains a reminder that bravery on screen often pays the price first. Some shows lasted long enough to become legends. Salute Your Shorts only needed one season. Set in Camp Anawanna, this scrappy little series captured the chaos, laughter, and bittersweet awkwardness of summer camp better than anything before or since. It was loud, it was messy, it was perfect. Every episode was a snapshot of friendship forged in bug spray and bad cafeteria food. You had Donkey Lips, the lovable underdog; Budnick, the rule-breaking prankster with a hidden soft side; Z, Dina, Sponge. They were not polished or pretty. They were real. Kids who wore mismatched socks, fought over bunk beds, and stayed up too late daring each other to sneak into the woods. But what made Salute Your Shorts stick was its honesty. It understood that camp is more than canoe races and ghost stories. It is where kids first learn how to be away from home, how to find your place, how to fall in and out of crushes and feel like the world is ending over a lost flashlight. It was funny, yes, but also deeply nostalgic. Even as it aired, it felt like something already gone. Maybe that is why it ended so quickly. It burned too bright. Networks wanted polish. What they got was heart. Now it survives in memory, in campfire smoke and the sound of a distant whistle, in the way the theme song still gets stuck in your head out of nowhere. For those who remember, Salute Your Shorts was more than just a show. It was a summer that never really ended. Roundhouse was what happened when raw teen energy smashed into a live stage and exploded into music, movement, and unapologetic weirdness. It was not just a sketch show. It was a stage, a rotating one literally, where comedy met chaos and somehow made sense of being a teenager in the 1990s. Roundhouse was messy, loud, and never afraid to take swings at real issues. Divorce, bullying, crushes, loneliness, it tackled all of it. But not with lectures or moral of the day endings. It used dance, it used music, it used fast cuts and louder voices than any adult was ready for. Every episode felt like a fever dream on roller skates, but it worked because it came from truth. This was a show made by young people, for young people, without a single ounce of condescension. The cast felt like your friends, the cooler, weirder ones who actually talked about stuff no one else would. One moment, you would be laughing at a sketch about school lunch. The next, you were suddenly thinking about what it meant to grow up in a broken home. And then, just like that, you were dancing again. Roundhouse made you feel seen, not polished, not perfect, just seen. It was the voice in your head screaming, "Why does no one talk about this?" And then suddenly, they did. It burned bright, burned fast, and left behind a legacy that still feels impossible to replicate. It was not just a kids' show. It was a stage for everything real, messy, and beautiful about growing up. There was something sacred about 227, like a front porch conversation on a warm night that you did not want to end. It was not flashy. It did not need a catchphrase or an outrageous setting to keep your attention. It just gave you people, real people, laughing, arguing, leaning on each other through life's ordinary storms. Centered around Mary Jenkins and her neighbors in a Washington, D.C. apartment building, 227 gave African-American family life the center stage it had long been denied. And it did it with humor, grace, and strength. Mary was sharp and fiercely loyal, with a side eye that could shut down a room. Sandra Clark, her glamorous, sassy neighbor, lit up the screen in high heels and higher drama. But what made 227 matter was not just the characters, it was the culture it celebrated. Sunday dinners, hallway gossip, community struggles. It showed Black joy and Black resilience in a way that felt honest and rare. For many families, this was the first time they saw themselves on screen not as sidekicks or stereotypes, but as the stars. And yet, 227 quietly vanished. It ended not in scandal or protest, but in silence. The world moved on, and network television forgot the space it had once carved out. The stories stopped airing, but they never stopped mattering. Today, it is a name that gets a smile from those who remember, and a blank stare from those who do not. But for anyone who grew up with it, 227 was not just a sitcom. It was home. Marty Feldman was impossible to forget. Those wide eyes, that surreal humor, that presence. Already a star in Britain, Feldman brought his signature style to American television in the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. It was a sketch show that took absurdity seriously. The pace was fast, the visuals wild, and the tone unapologetically weird. Feldman was the kind of performer who could turn nonsense into poetry, if you were willing to go along for the ride. But American audiences in the early 1970s were not quite ready for it. The show was a whirlwind of bizarre sketches, musical numbers, and animated interludes. One moment he was impersonating a dictator in a tutu, the next he was playing chess with a chicken. It had more in common with Monty Python than with anything on American prime time. And that was the problem. The cultural gap was just a little too wide. Audiences were used to the familiar rhythm of variety shows, not the frenetic chaos of British surrealism. Viewers were confused, advertisers were wary, critics admired Feldman's genius but questioned the format's accessibility. Despite strong backing and an ambitious slate of episodes, the comedy machine sputtered out after just one season. Feldman would go on to have success in films, especially with roles like Igor in Young Frankenstein. But this television experiment became more of a cult curiosity than a breakthrough. Today, it is a relic of creative risk, a show that swung for the fences and missed, but missed in a way that still dazzles. Not all brilliance lands. Sometimes it just flashes once and vanishes. "You're under arrest, sugar." That was the catchphrase that made America sit up and take notice, if only briefly. Get Christy Love was revolutionary in its time, featuring one of television's first black female leads in a crime drama. Teresa Graves starred as Christy Love, an undercover detective in a world that was still figuring out how to talk about race, power, and gender. She was smart, tough, stylish, and unforgettable. The show was based loosely on a made-for-television movie, which drew major buzz. ABC thought they had the next big hit on their hands, and for a moment, it seemed like they did. But then the cracks began to show. The scripts were formulaic, the action routine, and the production values limited. Christy Love was meant to be bold, but the stories rarely let her break out of tired cliches. Behind the scenes, Graves, who had converted to a religious faith, refused to participate in any scenes she felt were too violent or provocative. Creative clashes followed. The network struggled to find the right tone. Ratings dipped, and by the end of its first season, the show was gone. What should have been a trailblazer was reduced to a footnote. Still, Christy Love carved out a place in history. She opened a door that had been shut for too long, even if she did not get to walk all the way through it. Today, she is remembered more for what she represented than for the plots she solved. A symbol of potential unrealized, a legend born from a show that never had the chance to grow. This one did not need a script. An American Family was the first of its kind, a raw, unscripted look into the real life of a real family, the Louds. And America was not ready. When it aired in 1973, it shattered every idea we had about what family television meant. This was not fiction. This was not safe. The Loud family fought, cried, broke down on camera. We watched a marriage fall apart. We saw a son come out as gay on national television at a time when even saying the word was taboo. Viewers were shocked, some were angry, others felt seen for the first time. The Louds were not perfect, and that was the point. This was a mirror held up to the nation, and not everyone liked what they saw. The show only aired once, in a 13-part documentary format, but its ripples never stopped. It inspired decades of reality television, but none captured the raw honesty of this one. An American Family vanished not because it failed, but because it told the truth. A truth that television, and maybe the country itself, was not yet ready to hear. Watching it now is like opening an old wound. You see how far we have come, but also how far we have not. The Louds were just a family, but they were also a revolution. Cousin Skeeter was the kind of show that made you do a double take the first time you saw it, because there was no warning for how loud, fast, and absolutely unfiltered it was. A puppet, not animated, not digital. A real, in-your-face puppet, dropped right into the middle of a live-action family sitcom like he owned the place. And somehow, he kind of did. Cousin Skeeter was Bobby's cousin, sure, but he was also your cousin, the one who was always saying something wild at the dinner table, getting you in trouble, then making you laugh so hard you forgot why you were mad. He had that energy, the energy that made teachers roll their eyes and kids cheer louder. His jokes hit fast. His entrances were louder than anything else on Nickelodeon. But under all that chaos was something rare. Skeeter, for all his wild behavior, was never mean. He messed up, yeah, but he showed up for Bobby every single time. The show had a rhythm that was impossible to ignore. It blended urban culture, slapstick comedy, and family dynamics in a way that no other show at the time dared to do. And let us not gloss over the fact that it was one of the few kids' shows that put black culture and black family life right at the center, without turning it into a lesson. Just life, just jokes, just real. Watching Cousin Skeeter now is like hearing an old mixtape from your childhood. The jokes might land different, The puppet might look a little out of place, but the feeling? Still gold. It was loud and loving and absolutely unique. There is nothing on television today quite like it. And honestly, we were lucky to grow up with it, even if we had no idea what we had until it was gone. It was a sitcom with bark, but no bite. McGurk. A Dog's Life featured actors in full-body dog costumes, playing a family of suburban canines navigating everyday problems like job interviews, neighborhood feuds, and raising puppies. Yes, really. It sounds like a bizarre fever dream, and watching it felt even stranger. The actors, muffled by their rubber dog heads, delivered dialogue through stiff movements and awkward lip-syncing. The humor relied on canine puns and human situations made weirder by the fact that everyone was dressed like a golden retriever. The show's premise was never fully explained. Were these dogs living in a world of humans? Were they symbolic? Satirical? No one knew, and that uncertainty made it nearly impossible for viewers to connect. Audiences were bewildered, critics were harsh, even kids, who were assumed to be the target audience, seemed more confused than entertained. NBC hoped it would be a quirky, family-friendly hit, but McGurk stumbled out of the gate. The novelty wore off fast. Once you got past the initial shock of talking dogs in business suits, there was not much left. No sharp writing, no emotional core, just a lot of wagging tails and sitcom tropes buried in fur. The show lasted only a handful of episodes before being quietly retired. Few mourned its passing. But in its own strange way, McGurk has become a cult legend. Proof that in the 1970s, networks were willing to try anything, even a dog suit sitcom. Today, it stands as one of the oddest experiments to ever grace prime time. A surreal reminder that television's strangest ideas sometimes make it all the way to air. This show did not just imagine superpowers, it made you feel like they might happen to you next. The secret world of Alex Mack was every middle schooler's fantasy wrapped in a denim jacket and a bucket hat. When a normal girl named Alex is accidentally doused in a mysterious chemical, she gains powers. She can move things with her mind, shoot electricity from her fingers, and even melt into a puddle. But this was not some glossy superhero tale. Alex did not become famous or powerful. She became hunted, and afraid, and different. The show was about more than abilities. It was about the isolation of adolescence, about hiding who you are because the world is not ready, about balancing science homework with secret identities, friendship with fear. Alex was smart, brave, vulnerable, and deeply human. Her world was not filled with capes and explosions, but with skateboards, lockers, and the quiet terror of being discovered. There were corporations chasing her, best friends protecting her, and parents who had no idea what she was going through. That made it real. That made it hurt. The show resonated because it never glamorized its concept. It treated being special as a burden. And for kids feeling weird or out of place, that message was everything. When it ended after 4 seasons, it left behind more than a cliffhanger. It left behind a community of viewers who still wonder what happened to Alex and whether there is still magic hiding just beneath the surface of a normal life. The Busy World of Richard Scarry was one of those rare shows that made everyday life feel like an adventure. Not because it was flashy, but because it paid attention. Everything moved fast, but nothing felt rushed. The streets of Busy Town were filled with animals dressed like people, working jobs, making mistakes, saying sorry, and trying again. As a kid, that mattered more than you realized. You watched Hucklecat and Lowly Worm do everything from baking bread to learning how the post office worked. And it felt exciting, important. Like even the tiniest job had a story behind it. That was the genius of Richard Scarry. It turned the ordinary into something worth noticing. You were not just learning about the world, you were learning how to see it. To notice the mail truck, the grocery store clerk, the guy fixing the manhole. It told you that everyone mattered, even if they were just delivering apples. The animation was soft and playful, full of colors that felt like warm mornings in kindergarten. The music was cheerful but never annoying, and the characters made you feel like Busy Town could be your town, just one step to the left behind your backyard fence. It was educational, sure, but never preachy. It explained the world without making it feel boring. And more than anything, it gave you the feeling that growing up might actually be kind of fun. Like there was a place for you in it, a job to do, a story to be part of. You did not just watch it. You lived in it for a few minutes at a time. And honestly, that was enough. Which of these flops do you remember? Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe before they vanish again.